Welcome back, book lovers. We are here talking about The Wicked Life and Times of the Wicked Witch of the West by Gregory Maguire. Of course, we have Phil Svitek and myself, Marisa Serafini. Um, I picked this choice because it is kind of very topical right now. Wicked is out in theaters as of right now, just to put like a timestamp on our show. But the story of Wizard of Oz, Glinda, Wicked Witch of the West has been around for decades, and it will like outlive us all. But the fact that it's coming back around into the zeitgeist, I think it's a good time to read this book. So we're gonna get all into it. It's a lot heavier, thicker, denser book than I thought it was gonna be. But Phil, what were your quick thoughts?
Yeah. So if anyone is expecting to go see Wicked the musical or Wicked the musical movie, and then they want to read the book, vastly different. And we're not talking
Yeah.
about Harry Potter movies to Harry Potter books, certain plot lines got omitted and this and that because of runtime. We're talking swaths of emotion, characters, all kinds of different things. And simply put, the movie it has uh, it has its emotional beats, but overall a feel good thing. The book, an FU thing.
I totally agree. I think the book is the best way to describe it. The book is the rated R version, and Wicked is the PG-13 version. Um, and I think the book definitely obviously goes heavier into the themes. It's a lot darker. There's a lot more death. There's a lot more loss and grieving, which I think adds more to the character development of
And
Elphaba
sex. Don't
and
forget
sex.
this.
Of course not. Why? I mean, come on. So I mean, we'll definitely get into it, but as usual, books usually go heavier into the themes that develop throughout the story. So,
But
your
this is even more so. It's very much like it'd be no different than when you see a movie that says like inspired by real life events. That's what Wicked the musical is more like. It's like, hey, we saw this book, we liked it, so we're going to be inspired by it.
Mhm.
But it's not like to call it an adaptation. To me, Wicked the musical movie is a faithful adaptation of Wicked the musical play, whereas both are not an adaptation that's very faithful to the book. In
Yeah,
spirit,
of
at its core, like the fundamental things are there. Sure, you got Elphaba, you got Glinda or Glinda, you've got several characters with the same names, but how they play out and so forth, vastly different. So,
vastly different from the book to the play version. And then also it's just like um the characters and their motivations are also different too, which and has different outcomes of what. And I think the musical version is like a very specific time point in both Glinda and Elphaba's life. It's like he really focuses on like a good solid decade, whereas the book focuses on the entire life timeline. And so Wicked would be like a glimpse into a certain chapter of their lives. That's
yeah.
the best way I could explain it.
Remember when,
But yeah, no, keep going.
remember Addams Family, the original movie with Angelica Houston,
Yeah.
and she's reading Hansel and Gretel, and she's doing it from the point of the witch, and she has all the kids crying. So like we're used to the Hansel and Gretel, the normal story that makes
Hmm.
kids laugh and cheer. This is where all the kids are crying
This
after
is,
Morticia Adams tells them the gruesome story of how the witch was burned by very mean children of Hansel and Gretel.
yeah.
So
And I think it also shows just like how one is raised is or like reared is also how they view the world too, which is vastly different from everybody else. And we can even get into that too, because that's a very universal topic. But the overall book, the main plot basically is the political and social and ethical commentary on nature of good and evil and takes place in the land of Oz. In the years leading to Dorothy's arrival, the story centers on Elphaba Throp, a misunderstood green-skinned girl who grows up to become the notorious Wicked Witch of the West that we all know. Um, Gregory Maguire, the author, fashioned the name Elphaba from the initials of the original writer, Lyman Frank Baum, LFB. So we got Elphaba out of that, and the story itself, the book, is divided into 5 different locations throughout the book, basically the different acts. And there is a moment where Wicked Witch is actually spying on Dorothy and her friends. So like at some point they cross paths to the story that we all know and love from Wizard of Oz. So this book actually is the first of a series. Admittedly, I haven't read the second or third or fourth. But there is Son of the Witch after this one, A Lion Among Men, and Out of Oz. And of course, there's the whole series of The Wizard of Oz from the original writer. Uh, and yeah, I mean, I knew about this book when I was a teenager because admittedly I was in high school when The Wicked Broadway blew up and I knew about the book. I just didn't read it. I'm glad I didn't read it back then because I don't think high school Marissa could really comprehend the um the difficultness and how intricate the story is compared to adult Marissa reading it now. So I think it's actually better that I read it at this point in my life than being a teenager.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, at the time too, obviously, like Harry Potter was still big and going on and stuff like that. So I think book-wise, a lot of things were covered in that way. The only thing Harry Potter didn't have a stranglehold on at the time was, plays. So
yeah,
it left that avenue for Wicked.
absolutely. Yeah, the story, the genre generally is fantasy, and the actual writing style, from the author Maguire became interested in examining the nature of evil from the perspective of someone who was considered evil by someone else, by basically her peers. It's really a revisionist version of the Land of Oz and all the characters that we know and love. And I think that's very interesting because this is not the first time we've seen sequels of other stories and other, iconic characters. But what are your thoughts of the revisionist area part of it?
Yeah, I think it works well, and I do like stories like that. I think to paint the world as simply black and white, I don't know, it always kind of irks me about certain fantasy books or movies or even TV shows. I think things are a little bit more nuanced, and I do appreciate it. And I think a big sort of switch for me, by the way, spoilers into everything, um, is that up front in the book, Elphaba pretty much knows and has a dislike for the wizard. Whereas in the movie, not to say that she has an idolization of the wizard, but she wants, like, much like Dorothy, she thinks the wizard will solve her problems. And
Mhm.
that's not the case, right? Um, and then kind of like the X factor of all of this, like when we talk about Wizard of Oz, I think for the most part, we're talking about the Judy Garland movie, which is, obviously a good representation of what the Wizard of Oz is, but certain things are very different from the book versus the Judy Garland movie, i.e., the ruby slippers are not actually a thing. Hence why in the movie and they're. Actually like silver slippers.
Silver. Yeah.
So anyway, um, I don't know if that had a point there, but there you
No,
go.
it's very true. I think it just shows the differences that we've always see from book to screen. The things that do change, like the fact that the shoes are still there and they have a deeper representation and deeper meaning, um, to the Wicked Witch of the West, more than what the book or the play explains. And I think the book really shows so that's something I wasn't actually really expecting. I knew they represented something, but the reason behind it and the the reason why Glinda gave it to, and we'll get all into it, but not to jump ahead, but Glinda gave the shoes off. There's like it's a whole different reason than what the movie or the play told us. And the book, it gets way more political than I thought it ever would.
Yeah, and I think what this does, right, even beyond the revisionist aspect, like if we just consider this like a prequel, um, rather than just give us dumb reasons of, why a certain character has this or that, there's an emotional reason why we care, right? That in some ways strengthens our love of the original, and we just see it in different light and things like that. So I think that's a key element, because just to take that material and essentially do a prequel just to hit certain beats, we've seen that it's not very interesting. What makes this interesting, as I said, I think it takes that notion of, we all know the Wizard of Oz is kind of like a scam artist, and just heightens that a little bit, but then contrasted to, uh, I'll say Elphaba's kind of the main character. Obviously, there's Glinda and so forth, but I think as far as, I don't know who I emotionally gravitate towards, I think it's Elphaba's story. I mean, it's called, Wicked and the Life and Times of the
Like,
Wicked Witch of the West. So I think it's there
yeah.
in the title for us.
Yeah, it's definitely Elphaba's story, backstory, but it goes deeper into all the people in her life that affected her and twisted her image into how we perceive her now as the Wicked Witch of the West. And I think that's what the book does a great job of, actually like showing in real time how her identity was being changed throughout. I think the best way to break down this book, because it is very heavy. A lot of characters come in and out of different acts, and like you'll see one character in act one, but won't see them again till like act four, you know? So I think the best way we can talk about this book is just break it down in acts, and by the characters who show up in this. So basically, like act one, we have our main character, Elphaba, her father, Frexpar Thorop and Melina Thorop, and her sister, Nessa Rose, and the nanny. And so, what are your thoughts of Elphaba and how she was raised? How Nessa Rose was more the favorite child compared to Elphaba to in the eyes of her father Frex, and how that affected Elphaba's childhood.
Yeah, in some ways, I respected how you were just like thrown into this magical land of Oz, and there's all these geopolitics that, listen, you got to be on board for, because we're going 100 miles an hour into it. But then you start to sort of put the pieces together and be like, okay, what's what? And so, you start to get the the reasons why, certainly, like her father, would have a dislike, and things like that. And, in this case, it's very religious based, among other things. So yeah, that to me was very understandable, but also oddly, obviously hypocritical, where he's like literally this minister that's supposed to spread the good word of, as they call him, the unnamed God, and yet he
Yeah.
can't even love his own daughter, essentially. So, yeah, yeah, very interesting right off the bat.
Yeah, very messed up. But I also understand that, because it's just like being growing up in a Catholic kind of atmosphere. I definitely understand like those who are put in a position, and like he was governor of Munchkinland, so he already had a position of title there, and then being also a minister and proselytizing a very, very misconstrued type of religion, from an outsider's perspective, but really passing on that poison to the daughter Nessa Rose, who like basically drank the Kool-Aid, and because that made her the favorite over Elphaba, and Elphaba basically just saw the bullshit, and then she's like, yeah, nah, I don't believe that. Mm-mm. And wasn't having any of that. So that already created some discontent and a separation between her and her father. Even being, you know, ostracized by her parents, just starting off in his childhood, really like bled into the rest of her life.
Yeah, I mean, the mom wasn't particularly interested in being a mom, it didn't seem like. And then obviously, like, to me, it was that interesting component where, they go into town, wherever it was, and, there's the mom with all the kids, and, they have like their play dates and stuff like that. Um, so that to me, that aspect of it was fascinating because in a way, finally Elphaba like was allowed to like have friends and just kind of be herself, and she was for the most part accepted, it seemed like. And then we sort of end that whole part where she's ripped away from her home, and now they're going elsewhere on you know so
Mhm.
and for the most part we don't really get like the rest of that backstory until later, and we get little pieces here and there, but obviously we don't like see her. We get her very early childhood, and then we get her in school, but there's that big gap of, well, what happened?
Yeah. And to bridge the gap is like basically when Nessa Rose was born in the book form, she actually doesn't have arms, um, which makes her physically disabled. And so she can't walk properly and all that. And also, but in the Broadway form that she doesn't, and she's in a wheelchair. She actually does have arms, but she just can't walk. So like they kind of changed the physical disability there, but the idea of they both had their limitations. Elphaba, despite being like a regular quote unquote person, it's just really her skin color is green. And that causes, discrimination and racism, whereas Nessa Rose had a physical disability, which causes her own discrimination amongst people, but that seemed more tolerable than screen, like a green color skin. Um, so
Which is
that kind
also,
of oh yeah, keep going.
well, no, I was just gonna say, like, which is also weird because like we're in this fictional land of Oz where um you have animals talking, you have these little people, the Munchkin Landers and so forth. So it's not like this utopia of just a single like you have all these fantastical beings there, and so it's like, why is a green woman the standout in all of this is a little
Right.
bit um of a hilarity to me.
Right. It's like, why is she any different from any other different characters that you already see? This
Yeah.
is a hodgepodge of different personalities and characters and stuff. And it's like, why is she standing out? Like you said. But I think it's also the influence of her father being in that position, and everybody actually listening to him, and he's the one who's spurting out all this negative image of his own daughter, which people are you know, believing in. So I think it's just like the influence of someone higher up making everyone believe what she is being told by everybody. So that basically moves us on to Act Two, which is basically Shiz University. This is where Galinda comes in, and Elphaba and Galinda form a unlikely friendship. Um, as green as Elphaba is, Galinda is super pink. And she grew up with a different type of lifestyle, entitlement, money. There's like a higher gravitas to her character compared to how Elphaba grew up. So what do you think of this dynamic pairing and how they met and how they started off in the relationship?
Yeah, obviously it's very different from the movie. I mean, they're still Shiz University, but Alphaba's the one going to attend there. And it's interesting because, Alphaba's very studious and she's reading a lot of books on unionist history and stuff like that, which is the religion of her father, because she wants to attempt to learn all of this, right? And in the backdrop of all of this, we get a lot of the sort of political aspect of all of it. Um, how animals with a capital A, the ones that can talk, they're sort of being outed. Um, so we get that whole thing. Um, and they end up being roommates because a complete character that's not in the play apparently is Alma Clutch,
Yeah.
who I guess all these girls have just like a babysitter if you're rich enough. Is that what it is?
Yeah. Well, I kind of imagine like a caretaker, their own like handmaiden, basically.
Yeah. So that comes into play. And obviously, a big difference is also that there's Shiz, which is like essentially a girls' school, but they're within a town that also has other schools. And, there's boys' schools and stuff like that. And nary the twain shall meet until we need them to. Uh,
Hmm.
so I think, if anything, like I appreciated this version. I think it works well for the book of the timeline and the series of events that leads them to their friendship because there's quite a lot that happens and it doesn't just happen over 1 year. It kind of happens over multiple, right? And essentially Elphaba's kind of getting ready for her sister to come and then she's going to join the fold. So there's a
Hmm.
lot going on there.
Yeah, it's a slow burn of a story or slow melt, I guess you could say, of a story. Um, yeah, and another big character that actually gets introduced in Act Two is Madame Marble, and also, of course, Dr. Dillman and Bach and Fiera. But what were your thoughts on Madame Marble? Did you see her for who she became at first and like how she influenced Elphaba? What were your thoughts of her?
Yeah, I mean, I based on her interactions with Galinda, and not that Galinda was a saint, but Madame Marvel was quite dismissive. And just the name, it's a little bit like on the nose for me. It's like, oh, I just have to change the M to an H. Madame Horrible.
Horrible. Yeah.
So that aspect of it was a little bit of a tell, but I didn't mind it. If anything, I was more interested in Bach that came in because that's her childhood friend, and she essentially denounced her whole, Act One life, if you will.
Yeah, poor Bach. Bach got the short end and stick in the entire story. Like, and he's not one of the only ones too. But I think it just shows that like there were characters in Elphaba's life that like generally wanted to be friends with her, despite her color of her skin and her personality and stuff. It's like she could have had genuine friendships too. Um, yeah, your thoughts of Dr. Dillerman and he is a sentient goat. He's a professor at the School of Shiz and University. But he's basically he's the honest one telling the community what's happening in the government. Like the animals are being mistreated, they're being forced into oppression. And he's trying to relay this information. Some people are believing him, some are not. But what are your thoughts of Dr. Dillman?
Yeah, there was a lot of he was an interesting figure for sure. Made even more interesting that I had to like, wait, what? All of a sudden we're just reading, and all of a sudden he's just dead. You know,
Hmm.
where that seemed to come out a little out of nowhere. I mean, obviously it's set up with that there's a whole political thriller aspect to this, but still, you don't expect him to just die. Um, but I do like not only did I like him as a character, because I think what's nice is he affected Galinda as well, because they had the train ride over together and they had their interaction. But also, he was kind of the glue that brought a lot of people together. So Elphaba during the summer, right? She was essentially an intern and doing a lot of the research. And because she's a woman, he's a goat, they don't have access to stuff. So in comes Bach and his other friends. So it became like a group project that really bonded them together. And I think that's the strength of what what he represented ultimately for the story.
Right. And he affected a lot of characters. And then you have, like you said, this murder that comes seemingly out of nowhere. Of course, it's going to affect all of them. They're like, what happened? Um, and that like really sets off Elphaba and like make her seize the way of who's in charge, who like the reason why behind it, and what that actually means in representing of the animal community. Um, and I think that's the reason why Elphaba and Dilliman got along was because they were outcasts. And I definitely understood that because, growing up as an Asian in the only white community, I was definitely an outcast. And like, I always got along with um, the queer people, queer community, the Black community, just like all the people who are already oppressed in our government and like in our society. It's like we kind of gravitate towards each other because we had that misunderstanding from everybody else. So like that bonds us. And I think that's what Dylan and Elphaba had. Like everyone didn't fully understand them and didn't accept them, so they naturally became friends. Um, and that's actually very relevant and still going on in today's society. It's still very much a theme,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
I mean, just on a thematic level, whether the book or the play or the movie, the idea that the wizard is essentially just gaslighting everybody, and in this weirdo land that I've highlighted, the fact that like, oh no, we can't have anyone that does seem out of place. So like, okay, we'll take the animals away. You're green, so we don't like you, and so it just becomes right this homogenization of like we just want one particular type of person. Um,
Yeah,
so yeah, all that is there. The timing of it all is rather, um, I won't say dubious, but I mean, it just highlights how
it's
cyclical
relevant.
human history is, and why art in general is important to continue on keeping.
Explaining it. Absolutely. Also Fiero Tigelaar, who becomes a main character, bigger character in the overall story and definitely in Elphaba's life. Your thoughts of Fiero and how he comes in? He's already kind of an outcast because he has, blue diamonds across his tattoos across his body and stuff. So physically, he also looks different. And he's more of a quiet, more reserved version of a character in the book than we see in the play Broadway version, where Fierro is very like rebellious in the way, and he's already against authority and just kind of does his own thing, hence dancing through life. But your thoughts of Fierro?
Yeah, I think he represents in both ultimately this different version because it's one thing to be different, but he has a privilege that Elphaba doesn't, right? And so even though there's a distance between him and whoever else, he's got the means to do with power what he potentially could want, right? Um, and it's that Spider-Man thing of with great power comes great responsibility. And I think that's his role in all of this is like, what does one do with their privilege ultimately, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, he is a prince despite his differences, but that even having a title makes him higher than what Elphaba is. And makes him higher in the social status of everything already. So he already has an advantage. Um, Coming up into Act 3, we basically get The Wizard of Oz and overall Emerald City. And here is where we learn more the political scandal that's going on in the quote unquote capital of the land. Um, and as we know from the original version, that basically the Oz is a con artist and twists, you know, propaganda into people. And so we know, just like as a reader, as an audience, as like the just, dramatic irony, we know the kind of character Oz is, but Elphaba unfortunately doesn't because she was reared into this version like, oh, he's someone who's amazing, he can fix a lot of our problems, he has the power to do it. And then once she realized who he truly is, quote unquote, showing his true colors, Elphaba was not having it. So your thoughts of Oz and how different his character actually is and how it really affected Elphaba.
Yeah, I think the subtlety is like I think there was always this undertone even before that part of it of that the government was doing nefarious things because obviously our good doctor. But if anything, there was this at least hope that if given the research and things of that nature, then through the means of not necessarily the judicial system, but the system in general, a point could be made of like, no, humans and animals that speak are one and the same. And so that was ultimately, I think, the belief that Elphaba held on, that even if certain people are corrupt, whether the wizard or otherwise, if given actual evidence, they'll be like, oh, they can change their minds, right? And it's this altruistic view of the world. And come to learn of like, no, the wizard doesn't really care about scientific research or any of that. He doesn't like it. He doesn't like it. And he's going to do what he wants to do because of his, his horrible feelings. So,
Right.
and that to me, like that was the turning point in kind of Elphaba coming to terms with, wow, these people kind of really suck.
Yeah. And I think the Broadway version, the play version really actually I think explains well, maybe for me, that that Oz character was like, well, we have to give the audience an enemy. There has to be good, there has to be evil. So like who's the enemy? He immediately proclaims that the animals are. It's like, okay, because they're different, they're educated, they're different, we gotta oppress them. They're causing all this mayhem, which really they aren't. But to you know uh like really defame different people and stuff, and made his character look better because he's known as the one who can solve all the problems, so everyone's going to turn to him, and that gives him even more power over people when he puts them even farther down, which is like, oh, Oz, you're such an asshole. you know
That was the aspect of it that was most heinous, I think, ultimately, is that like for all of its parts, like if you took out the wizard as I see it, you could have this utopia, right? Like there's nothing fundamentally wrong going on in Oz. It's just
Mm.
this ego of the wizard in order to like keep his power, he needs to show that he is powerful. And so how does he do it, right? Like it's a fabricated solution to a fabricated problem as opposed to a
Hmm.
bullshit solution to an actual problem, right? So that to me is like even the more like what the hell, dude?
Yeah. It's a very toxic mentality of, just like the monarchy of the Ozmas, like the whole line of Oz that rules, the Emerald City over and over and over again, and just this particular Oz in this timeline, he was so desperate to like hold and retain his power to be the most important person that he had to create his own enemy to make him look like the good person, which is really messed up.
Instead of just being, hey, how about this? If you want to be likable, just do good things, Like I don't know. It's a
Right.
simplistic view of the world, but I don't understand why, why we can't do
Yeah.
that.
But I think that goes back to the whole black and white aspect. Is like, oh, they're bad, we're good, X, Y, and Z, and that's where things get gray. Um, Also in more in this act, it's like we see kind of the relationships, friendships grow into, and we see how Alphaba and Fiero kind of have a thing going on. Although Glinda has a thing for Fiero. So like the whole there's like it's not even a relationship triangle. It's like a relationship box. There's a lot of things. And I think like the Broadway version definitely like plays into the relationship aspect a little bit more, where you can see the people's motivations and why they help each other, basically out of love. And in this, we kind of have like a few people interested in each other in their own love circle going on, but it more forms in, it starts in Act Two and then goes along more into Act Three and Four. Moving on to Act Four, really, or is there anything else that maybe you want to mention in Act Three that we didn't cover?
This isn't all part of Act 3, but Bach in particular, right? Like you know, he has this unrequited love for Glinda, and I think, in the book, just by the nature of spending more time and being able to elaborate, you understand that sense. And because in the book, they kiss.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
that happened. So that gave him like a glimmer of hope that you don't get in the play.
Yeah, no, you don't. Yeah, and like the main thing really with Act Three is that Elphaba's seeing this discrimination happening against animals, and she's basically standing up for their rights and going to the wizard. Everyone thinks that she's gonna ask the wizard to take away her green colored skin because that's the one thing that's like really truly held her back in life. But really, she wasn't thinking about herself. She was thinking about others, and she was asking the wizard to help these animals, and finding out the wizard is the one who actually started all of it. Therefore, Elphaba was like, you're not a good person. I don't like you. You're not who I thought you were. And that like just basically derails the whole idea and her whole like lifestyle that she was, working towards. Um, and I think they did that really well also in the Broadway versions. Like she revered someone so much. He didn't. It's always like don't meet your heroes. And she met her hero and became a total disappointment. Um, and so that disagreement, Elphaba and Glinda realize after their now friendship and stuff, and they have different views of how the wizard is like being perceived. Um, Elphaba, of course, trying to stand up for everyone and being easily dismissed and rejected. She basically isolates herself. She's like, okay, sorry, Glenda, we're not agreeing. I'm gonna stay back in Emerald City. You can go back and be with the people who are drinking the Kool-Aid. And that starts to cause the rift in their friendship. And but Glinda kind of drinks the Kool-Aid. Well, I shouldn't say kind of, she really does. She gives into the propaganda as well, but she definitely does have different motivations of like trying to dismantle the political from the inside. What are your thoughts of Glinda's belief system and following the wizard and giving her a position of authority and making her, an actual like declaring her an actual good witch, good person.
Yeah, I appreciated, like, in this one, I think my only note with the play version is that Glinda is kind of like this ditzy character. And while, there's a fun side to Glinda in this one for sure, as far as the book, I think she's a lot smarter than she's made out to be necessarily in the play. Um, and so I think by doing that, you do see the inner workings there, and at least like there's a logic there of I'm trying to do something. We just disagree on how to get there, but at our core, we're trying to do the same thing, um, sort of an aspect. And um, yeah, that's what it makes it all the more heartbreaking is because they are fundamentally on the same page. But the fact
Yeah.
that the methods of which they're going about it is so vastly different is, obviously the tragic aspect of the whole thing. Um, and yeah, I mean, it's one of those you start to see like that phrase, right? The the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Good intentions.
Yeah, so she kind of represents that side of it, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it also shows just like how different Elphaba and Glinda are because Elphaba was willing to help other people and Glinda was giving into and drinking the Kool-Aid mostly to self-serve herself so she can just climb up the social ladder. It was more advantageous for Glinda's character and where she wanted to be in the wizard's eyes compared to what Elphaba wanted to be. And and that was like that really kind of hurts, because you think, we're led to believe that Glinda is such a good character, but the what she did to get to that position she basically threw her best friend under the bus, like just so she can be the good one in the eyes of the wizard, which
Yeah,
is unfortunate.
very.
So now we're moving on to Act 4. Years have passed. I believe it's like 7 years, 5 to 7 years. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but a good significant amount of years have passed. No one has seen or heard Elphaba. She's really been like keeping it on the down low. But this is where uh Elphaba now meets Fiero's wife and children in the book. And so we actually don't get this part in the Broadway. I'll just say that right now. These characters are completely left out. Um, and I think it's really interesting to see how Elphaba interacts with the family, interacts with children who aren't hers, but coming from a person that she, you know, started and grew a more deeper relationship with, which we'll get into. But your thoughts of how Elphaba and the relationship with this newfound family.
There was an aspect of it of like, why is it a simple case of, oh, come on in for tea, sort of a thing of like,
Hmm.
you know, because it was, I mean, it's an affair with the person's, you know, so, but apparently affairs are just like, as a side tangent, just they're just a thing. Everyone's having an affair.
It's
Uh,
so common.
in the first act, Elphaba's mother had an affair with anybody that would come in. Great, let's have at it.
Yeah.
And other characters have had many affairs as well. So we've kind of been conditioned. But as far as the interaction, yeah, I think, um, I guess in an odd way, it represents this notion that like two people that seemingly should dislike each other, given the history of it all, can come
Hmm.
together. You know, I don't know. I'm a little this part of it was a little bit like wonky for me, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because this is, when so many years of seclusion, um, that in self-isolation that she brought upon herself. And she goes to the land where Fiero grew up, where he's revered. It's like I don't think that was by accident. And then, she ultimately meets Fiero's family and seeing how the maybe basically getting like a glimpse of the life she could have had with Fiero, um, had they kept that relationship going or friendship going. And but also during this act, this is where her relationship with her sister is getting more and more difficult. Because at this point, Nessa Rose has really drank the Kool-Aid. Um, and the father is still definitely against Elphaba, but this is the point where the father's health is diminishing. Of course, the sister Nessa Rose like, come back, we need your help. Even though I know you two don't disagree, he's her father. Come back and basically be with him. And so Elphaba reluctantly goes back, and this is where I feel like the rift between them divides even farther. What are your thoughts of how the father played it into the sisterhood relationship, and just like twisting the idea of Nessa Rose is the good one and Elphaba is the bad one, just basically both based on their values and beliefs or systems are different.
Uh, I mean, much like the wizard, just a terrible human being, right? Uh,
Right.
and and even more so because at least again, like the wizard definitely pretends, but at least like we as an audience have this notion of like he knows what he is. He knows that he's kind of like a piece of crap. Whereas the father, Frax, he comes off as this righteous person, right? Like that's quite so it's like who's worse? The wizard or him? Because he believes his own lies, you know?
Yeah.
Whereas the wizard at least knows that they are lies. So that to me is like the very interesting part, and in terms of its theme, I'm just like how you can weaponize religion, I think is certainly a part of it, right? And that's what he, in many ways, represents. And it's not to say
Yeah.
that religion inherently is evil or negative. It's just when you weaponize it, this is what happens.
Yeah. Weaponizing and proselytation, absolutely. And because at this point in Act 4, because Nessa Rose has given so much into her title and the religion, she is now the basically the witch of the East, and like she has the title because that could have been Elphaba's title, but Elphaba basically renounced it and she went to the West Side. um, so at this point, because Nessa Rose is such a bad person, she's terrorizing all the Munchkins, in that and like much like her father, product of her environment, she's trying to force the religion upon the Munchkins, and they're not having it either.
Yeah. And so by association, that makes Elphaba bad because it's like, oh, well, they're sisters. So if
Right.
one's bad, the other, so like from
The
the
other
point of
must be.
view, yeah, from the point of view of the Munchkin landers, you know.
Yeah. And so, and that this is where um Wicked and Wizard of Oz, the movie story that we all know, and originally this is where they start to overlap because unfortunately, Madame Morrible, she's being the sorceress and stuff, and like Madame Morrible comes in and out of the story, but she is a threat throughout. Um, Madame Morrible's power and sorcery, she can control the weather, and because she saw like all this power happening, she's like, "Oh, I got to control this. I got to, you know, take over this." She creates the storm, and that's the storm that which Dorothy is in her house, and it kills Nessa Rose, aka the Wicked Witch of the East, and that's where Wizard of Oz actually starts. But I don't think people would really know that was actually Madame Morrible. She's the one who created the twister. We're like, oh, all right. It's not just some random storm. It was like, oh no, that was actually created by someone. So which like I think is actually pretty literary. That's a cool tie-in.
Yeah, it is because it gives it a whole new meaning, right? And when you sort of watch it from that perspective, Elphaba just wants her sisters. Like that is property of her, those slippers. You know?
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, the fact that again it like fabricated solution or fabricated problems beget fabricated solutions, right? So it's this like this didn't need to happen. It just happened because Marvel made it happen.
Yeah,
So and here's this poor innocent girl, Dorothy Gale, just being thrust
swept
into
up in
all
the
of
middle
it,
of it.
you know?
Yep. And like she had no control over it. And I think this is the fun part where the worlds intersect, and but me, as a reader, I didn't realize that the whole storm was created by someone, so I thought that was actually pretty cool to read as a reader. um so that basically moves us into Act 5, where now the wizard is playing a big part. Madame Marble has also shown her true colors. She's not a great person either, and the Elphaba and Nessa Rose and even Glinda, they are completely separated. They are living their own lives, and but however, Dorothy Gale and her friends are the ones who are like forcing them to be like, oh wait, we got to talk to each other. Something's happening. We got to actually, despite our differences, we got to like face each other now, which is um I think it's cool. And honestly, someone like Dorothy Gale who just like was not a part of any of this, unfortunately got caught up in it, like became like the main center of it. That brought all these characters back together for quote unquote showdown.
Yeah, and not to I mean the interesting part of it is what kind of happens after is that even though there's this recollection of what Dorothy says is the truth, no one believes her about the truth, right? So, in spite of like all of that, everyone just makes up whatever rumor lie that they ultimately want as far as the events of quote unquote the Wizard of Oz, you know? And what
Right.
happened and yeah, and in terms of what happened with Elphaba and her demise and things of that nature. Did you freeze?
Linda gave Nessa Rose's shoes
Hold on, go
to,
back. Go back.
oh,
I think for some
oh,
reason you froze. So I
okay.
finished up by saying the Wizard of Oz, and so then you could take it from there.
Okay, Wizard of Oz. Um, so yeah, this leads us back to Dorothy Gale, who like starts everything back again because when Dorothy Gale the house fell onto Nessa Rose, Glinda was conveniently nearby. Um, and to talk to all the Munchkin lands, she gave the slippers that were actually Nessa Rose to Dorothy, and which rightfully wasn't hers to give away in the first place. And so Elphaba, of course, is pissed. She's like, "Yo, those aren't your shoes. You don't have the right. Those like I have the right as the sister. Like I should be getting those shoes." And so it's like so again, that creates another big like, yo, what are you doing, Glinda? Um, and but also there's a more political aspect behind it because Glinda was more worried that there's going to be a civil feud between the Munchkins and them now who's going to be in power over the Munchkin land. So she immediately passed it off to Gale, Dorothy Gale, to like get these shoes out of here. Like take them to the wizard. This will show you that like yeah, you were powerful enough to quote unquote get rid of the Wicked Witch of the East. And that'll like basically prove your worth to send so the wizard could send you home. Um, but I didn't know there was a more political aspect behind it that the book goes more into.
Yeah, there always is. It's it's no different than like we thought Helen of Troy launched 1,000 ships. No, they just wanted
Yeah,
war.
yeah, they propagated that for sure. And so at this point, the wizard now, of course, he has twisted everybody's perspective and identity of uh, the Wicked Witch of the West now, which is Elphaba. Basically, it was like, okay, great, Dorothy Gale, I'll send you home if you kill Elphaba. Get rid of her. Get rid of her, because you already got rid of the East. Now get rid of the West, you know? And, you know, like basically do all the dirty work that I'm too lazy to do.
Not even
But we
lazy,
know at
can't
this
do.
point, Elphaba, sorry, what?
I said not even lazy, just can't do. Like incapable.
Yeah, because he doesn't have power. He doesn't have real power. Um, yes. So basically going to Dorothy's like, yo, kill Elphaba, great, and I'll send you home. And then, but at this point, the audience already knows that Elphaba is like so for animal rights and everything. And she has all these animals, and she has now heard that the wizard and has like sent Dorothy out to kill her. And so Elphaba sends out her animal friends basically to like stop Dorothy and invite her to the castle Kiamako, which becomes, this is the main location down in the showdown. Um, but this is the revisionist part of the story where you think that Elphaba Wicked Witch sent out the animals to stop Dorothy and her friends. It was actually more to invite them into the castle, be like, hey, let's talk. I'm actually not a bad person. But this is where the messages get lost in translation, and they think that these animals are out to kill them. And so, of course, the four friends are killing all the animals. This is hurting Elphaba's heart. Like, yo, you're killing my animals. No. And then once Dorothy Gale and the friends actually get to the castle, get to Elphaba, um, this is where like, no, I don't like you, Dorothy. You killed all my animals. And she's waving around her broom that inadvertently catches on fire. Dorothy innocently throws a bucket of water on Elphaba, therefore melts her because it was because of her green skin and because of her oppression and deprivation as a child, she was afraid of water too, and that inadvertently kills, quote unquote, Elphaba. Your thoughts of this, like just the revisionist aspect of what we know from the Wizard of Oz and from the original stories to what the reason behind Elphaba and sending out the animals to act more be like on the easier side of like just trying to create a friendship with Dorothy and the friends rather than going out and killing her.
Yeah, I mean, what I appreciated that it works on both levels where it still retains Dorothy as this innocent child that we like. Because what I don't think would have worked is if we made Dorothy out to be this another evil person, right?
Right.
And so it maintains her innocence, her childlike sort of wonder, while at the same time allowing us to see of like, oh, it really was just a miscommunication, a tragic
Mm-hmm.
one, but all the same. And I think that's part of the theme of like maybe let's slow down, maybe let's listen to each other, let cooler heads prevail, and stop listening to the assholes. You
Yeah.
know? So there you go. That's the moral of the story.
Yeah. Um, and I was thinking that's kind of basically where, the Wizard of Oz story kind of that we know basically ends because Dorothy takes the broom back to Wizard and, that hole goes down, Dorothy goes away, basically. And the wizard goes away. And I think it was more just out of cowardly. It's like, okay, both of these women are gone, the East and the West are gone. And then there's like, I no longer have to be here, which is weird. I don't feel like that story was like fully had a full resolution. Um,
Yeah, it's a little tough. I mean, what do you do with like that's the Wizard of Oz, right? So it's like you're kind
right.
of shoehorned into that, if you're gonna stay true to those events of Dorothy. But
Uh, yeah. And, also in midst of like, I don't know how I brushed over this, but also, the relationship and affair between Elphaba and Fiyero. They actually were trying to attack Fiyero, mostly because he was trying to, get the location of the Wicked Witch of the West because they couldn't find her, and they're like, "Oh, let's follow Fiyero," and then, hey, they have a relationship. We don't like him. We're gonna try to kill him. And that's where things go down. It's like you try to kill my hero. Elphaba's not having it. She cast a spell from the Grimoire, which actually she was trying to help Fiero not die, but ultimately turns him into the Scarecrow. So nothing could actually physically hurt him. And that's where Fiero and Scarecrow becomes the same character. And also Black really becomes the Tin Man because and this is where it bleeds into the Broadway version. And this is the Act Two, which I don't know if you're familiar with. So it's
yeah,
like it could
I'm
be very spoiler for you, but I
I'm
know the story. So
familiar. Like from what I understand, the play kind of handles that a little bit better than the book,
yeah,
you know. So, but yes,
yeah,
so
because
there's a
I feel.
backstory to our three, the lion. I was gonna say the lion, the
Mhm.
witch, and the wardrobe, but the lion, the scarecrow,
Wrong
and the
story.
Tin Man.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think, and I personally think that's what the Broadway version does better. In explaining how those characters came to be and how Elphaba was actually the one who caused it, who turned them into those characters, and whereas the audience is already led to believe those characters are who they were when we started the story. So I was like, I liked how they gave those backstories like a better original story with Elphaba's tie-in. And that's, where the Broadway version comes into play of and explains, how the messy relationships between Bach, Glinda, Elphaba, and Fiyero all go down. Like that whole love square rectangle that's all happening. That's what causes all of this. Um,
Well, the interesting
which
part,
we don't really see in the book.
yeah. it unfortunately undoes the whole "it was all a dream" sort of moment for Dorothy, right? Because the
Right.
lion, the scarecrow, and the Tin Man were like, her farming buddies.
Family. Yeah.
Yeah.
Basically
Uh,
her family members.
yeah. Although I know this doesn't happen in the play, but it'd be funny if like the movie version just had another ending of like Dorothy waking up and be like, ah, I have so many dreams about Oz. You know,
So many.
so just have a whole nother dream. No, that would be terrible. Don't do that.
Right. So, and I feel like this is where the main difference is. It's like definitely spoiler alert for anyone who doesn't know the Broadway version. Basically, because of the relationship, and it's just, let me try to explain it in the best way. You can edit this part. Um,
Well,
that's like, sorry,
well,
what?
I was gonna say the biggest difference is Elphaba lives. That's it.
Yes, Elphaba does live. But like the whole reason why they turned into the characters more is like Nessa Rose liked in the Broadway version, Nessa Rose liked Bach, Bach liked Glinda, Glinda liked Fiyero, but Fiyero liked Elphaba. And so like it's a whole messy relationship of unrequited love. Um, so Elphaba tries to save Fiero's life, casts a spell, he turns into the Scarecrow. Um, Nessa Rose loves Bach, um, and because now Bach has like basically proclaimed his love to Glinda, Nessa Rose is like, "No, you're my man," and she casts a spell on Bach basically to make him love her, which inadvertently actually backfires and shrinks his heart to nothing, which ultimately turns him into the Tin Man. Um, yeah, so so like you get it, the relationship literally gets messy, um, within each other, and I think that's what the Broadway version does a very good job explaining how they turn into their own characters. But also the Broadway version gives Elphaba a a happier ending, where everyone thinks that she's melted and she's gone, but it's actually a ruse. There was the trapdoor and now she basically faked her death and she can live happily ever after with Fiero. Your thoughts of this, like a happier ending that we didn't know?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think that's a lot more satisfying and a lot more, audience pleasing ultimately, right? Like
Yeah.
if if like I understand the story of the book, and it's a very powerful one, but it just kind of makes you feel like crap in the sense because it is revisionist, right? So we have the Wizard of Oz, boom, the Wicked Witch was evil and she died. Okay, cool. Except we learned that she wasn't evil. She was actually a really good person trying to do some really good stuff, but she also died. So you're like, oh,
Mhm.
I am like one of the Munchkinlanders who was fooled by all this propaganda, and but I can't do anything about it because she's dead. So yay
Right.
me. Um, so and obviously I think stories can have that and deserve to have that. I'm someone in my heart of hearts, I like a happier ending, so the play is much more attuned to what I appreciate, um
Right.
and especially because it's not just her that lived, it's also Fiero, so it's like yay, the two of them to get
Happy
like
ending.
evil people don't get a happy ending, but here she does get a happy ending, so that's great.
Yeah.
So,
And obviously, the Broadway version really hones on the friendships and relationships a lot better. And they really establish the Glinda, Elphaba friendship, like how they started off, they hated each other, how they actually grew to respect each other eventually. And then by the time, like even at the end of the Broadway version, like they truly do admit that like they helped each other, based off of the song For Good. It was like, no, we really were good friends in our lives. Like we served a purpose for each other despite how it turned out. So it's like I'll always remember you for that. And like that's where it's heartbreaking because you see a genuine friendship, but they realize they have to go their separate ways. And that's the heartbreaking nature of For Good. And that's why that song hits so hard. Um, and then it turns into a happier ending for Elphaba, which is nice. It's
No.
nice. Um, so basically that's a lot happens in this book. A lot that's different. Family aspects. There's a lot more death. There's a lot more violence. There's a lot more like we didn't even talk about how Elphaba basically had her own son, who she at first rejected, but ultimately finds out that actually is true based off the message saying it's like, oh no, this Nor is your son. So earlier, Lear is your son. So
There's a lot of layers, right? For sure. Way too many.
there is. And I think this is where like that's where it got complicated when you added the family aspect, because how Elphaba grew up in her family, which she basically separated herself, and now she has a second family, which is even more complicated. um, yeah, it really helps builds Elphaba character and like how she's still viewed by even her what she's quote unquote family compared to what society basically led everyone to believe who she was. Just like your whole image and like the deformation and how easily your identity can be destroyed by someone else. Um, it's beautiful and also tragic. Beautifully tragic.
Absolutely.
Um, Yeah, so obviously we've been like kind of going back and forth between the Broadway play, which, if you don't know, originally Elphaba was by Idina Menzel and Kristen Chenoweth was Glinda. That's why they're so huge. That's why they also, spoiler alert, made a cameo in the Wicked movie that just came out. But it was the Broadway version. It was such a big hit back in 2004. Nominated for the most Tonys, won three, and but actually lost Best Musical to Avenue Q. So there's like a whole Avenue Q and Wicked fans that's been a thing versus each other. But we're all Broadway lovers. We can love both plays and stuff. And then so even back then in 2004, Mark Platt, who was like the main stage producer, and he had said in several interviews that he was waiting for the Broadway version to like have a good longevity, or good long run before he wanted to adapt it into the film. Once uh um the film started going, there was a lot of production halts because just changing of directors, pandemic stopped, changed creative things, and just like it took a lot longer. The movie was supposed to be slated for like 2016, and it didn't actually come out until 2024. So like a good amount of years passed. So us, like myself, was like really excited for the movie, had to wait basically a decade for it. And now part one is out, part two will be out, and maybe we can come back for part two to like help close out this entire discussion. But of course, there are so many different versions of Wizard of Oz adaptations that are out there. But this is specifically the Wicked Witch of the West storyline. Um, yeah, I mean, it's a lot.
That's a
It's a lot.
lot.
I love the musical. I was like I said before, so like I was the target demographic for Wicked. I was literally in high school, 2004, 2008, when the Broadway took off. It was huge. Like we sang, and I was definitely a theater kid. Like we sang the soundtrack over and over and over and over again. We saw it together as a group on Broadway. It's just like that was our Hamilton. And fortunately, Broadway actually still grossed more money. Still to this day has grossed more money than Hamilton has. Just because, longevity has been out longer. But the story and the themes of Wicked definitely still resonates today. And I think that's why it's still important. People are gravitating it to it now, and why, and this new generation, the younger generation, like it's created during the millennium, like our generation, millennials, but now Gen Xers, or sorry, Gen Zers, Gen Alphas are now exploring it too. So it's cool. It's being introduced to even more people who can relate to it, especially it's more topical now in our universe. So it's
Yeah.
beautiful and it stands the test of time. So
Yeah.
anything else? It's a lot, I know.
No, I think he covered it. I think, yeah, I mean, the movie is obviously doing really well. I think it will continue to do really well. It's got great reviews, great word of mouth. Um, so yeah, I
Yeah,
think all positive signs that yeah, I think ultimately, I mean, when you go back to the book, like the early 1900s, I think it's a story, it's a world that survives the test of time, and I think I'm interested if there will be other iterations, because people are always going back to the Land of Oz, even the not so popular movie of Oz the Great and Powerful, right? Like there's various angles you can
right.
come at this with. So, some better than others, of course, but yeah, I think as long as there's fascination and there will be a fascination, there'll be more stories to tell in this world. And this is a good iteration of it for sure. So,
Yeah, I think it's just the idea of turning titles on their head. Like The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, ironically, was not wonderful. The Wicked Witch of the West was ironically not wicked.
yeah.
And so it's like really just like the message that people perceive and but at the end what we actually believe in at the end of the day. And I think that's the beauty of overall the whole story is like believe what you want, despite who's telling you what they're spoon feeding you. So books, Phil, has there been any other books that you have read recently?
Not this month.
Besides
This month
these?
I was busy. You got lucky that I got through this. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean I admit it's a thick. I was like I did highlight a lot of aspects of the whole good versus evil, which is just a big theme throughout. But yeah, so other books that I have currently read, I read The Lonely Hearts Book Club. Very that was fun, lighthearted, and The Art of Racing Rain. Because it's like book within a book. You know how like some books refer to other books?
Mhm.
And Lonely Hearts Club book referred Art of Racing Rain. There's like a whole chapter about it. I was like, oh yeah, I have that book too. Which I haven't read. I have seen the movie. And then so naturally that led me to that second book, and which I read, which also very heartwarming. If you're a dog lover, Phil, I know you definitely are.
Yes, my
Very
mom gave
good.
me that book, so
Yes,
yes.
it's a very very good read for anyone. I highly recommend it. Any upcoming books, Phil?
Well, we've got Hollow Kingdom by Kyra Jane Buxton in December. Not necessarily a holiday book, but should be a fun book. Then in January, I'm told we have TBD for you.
Yeah. Um, it's still TBD. Sorry. I was like, you and I were very busy this month. Yeah. Well, I promise I'll give you more
Well,
heads
picking
up
the book
of
is easier than
to read.
reading the book, just FYI. But
Yeah, I know.
well, and then in February, Howl's Moving Castle, which was a book by Diana Wynne Jones. So you might be familiar with the Hayao Miyazaki movie. Wonderful movie. I'm looking forward to seeing if the book is equally as majestical.
Yeah, that'll be fun. And like I love talking about adaptations because that's originally how we started our conversations for books into movies, or plays or any version types of adaptations. And so I love how we're still in its own way keeping that theme going here and there. All right. Thank you, readers, for following along with us. It's a very complicated book, like, not gonna lie, but it's actually a very good highlight of what happens in our society and what still happens, unfortunately, too. And like what you think is good and evil, it's not really, it's like it's way more gray than you think. And that's the tragic beauty of the world. So, Phil, where can everyone follow you?
at Phil Svitek. And if you get this copy of the book, it's got pictures of the actual play. So, that was fun.
Ah, yeah. Maybe I'll steal that from you because I have the I have the first version. You can follow me everywhere at Serafini TV. You can follow all of us and our books and our library of discussions and future discussions. So thank you, everybody. Keep reading, and we will see you for our next book.